Have you ever been watching a genre film, sci-fi, horror, action, and when you Googled it, discovered it had 17 sequels, 6 prequels, and 4 reboots, and thought, what could those movies possibly even be about? Well, you've come to the right place. Welcome to episode 1 of Sequelology. My aim with this series is to go film by film, with recap and review through a specific genre franchise, looking at both what made those original films so influential and the varying successes and failures attempting to capitalize on the name and continue, contextualize, or recreate the story. And we begin with one of the wooliest of all horror franchises, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series. A franchise with one unexpected masterpiece, followed by 3 direct sequels, made 12, 16, and 21 years later, then 2 reboots, and 2 prequels to those reboots. But we begin at a desolate farmhouse in 1974 Texas. I present to you the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The opening crawl introduces us to our protagonists, Sally, her brother Franklin, her boyfriend Jerry, her best friend Pam, and Pam's boyfriend, Kirk. On a road trip to their family's old farmhouse, they pick up a hitchhiker. He's skittish and odd, and out of nowhere, grabs Franklin's knife and slashes open his hand, cackling to the air. He snaps a picture of them, and when they don't want to buy it, he sets it on fire, grabs another knife, and slashes Franklin's arm. They finally eject him, and he follows along, kicking the van and rubbing blood on the side. They find a gas station, but the proprietor says they're out of gas until the following day. He offers them barbecue as a consolation. They limp the van to the decaying, abandoned family property. Franklin is transfixed by the bloody marks. Kirk and Pam just want to go swimming, but they smell gasoline and discover a neighboring house with a running generator. Kirk knocks on the door and heads inside, but all he discovers is a hammer to the head. Pam goes to follow, but runs across a horrific scene of bones and feathers strewn across the room. She goes to leave, but the man catches her and impales her on a hook in his prep room. A concerned Jerry finds Kirk's jacket, finds his way inside, finds Pam in the freezer, and finds a bludgeon to the head. Franklin and Sally argue about what to do, but trudging through the woods, the man in the smock finds them too and slaughters Franklin. She flees to his house and locks the door, which he begins sawing through. She pleads for help from 2 people that turn out to be corpses. He finally makes it in, and she leaps out the attic window. She makes it to the gas station and finds the old man still there. He comforts her and leaves to go get his truck. But when he does, he returns with a smile, a bag, and some rope. She grabs a knife, but he rushes her, tackles her, and subdues her in the bag. Turns out he knows the hitchhiker, and they both carry Sally into the house. He's angry about the sliced-up door and berates the man in the smock, who he calls Leatherface. The hitchhiker is delighted to find who they've captured, and they bring Grandpa down to meet her. They slice open Sally's finger, and Grandpa, who's alive by the way, sucks out the blood. They decide Grandpa should kill Sally, but he's utterly unable to hold on to the hammer. Sally breaks free and escapes through another window. The hitchhiker chases her down on the road, slashing her across the back, but he forgets to look both ways. The driver gets out to help, but finds Leatherface for his troubles. They escape through the other side of the cab, and when Leatherface pursues, he gets a wrench to the face and a chainsaw to the leg. She manages to flag down a passing truck and escape in the back of the cab. She laughs maniacally as she gets away, to Leatherface's unending frustration. Good morning. And that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the most influential horror films ever made. Horror at the time, in the early 1970s, was dominated by gauzy Italian giallo and somber Gothic British cinema. American horror at the time was trashy and forgettable, defined by killer animal garbage and inept geek shows. The Exorcist had caused a sensation the previous winter, but that film, while disturbing, is inherently cinematic, staged in a traditional urban setting with actors you recognize and an iconic soundtrack. TCM was different. TCM was grimy and strange. The actors were unfamiliar. The photography was grainy and naturalistic. Violence occurred suddenly, without warning, and in utter silence. Its closest relative may be Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left, which had caused a similar sensation a few years prior, but that film sometimes feels too amateurish and isn't as successful. I would say the least successful thing about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in true slasher style, are its protagonists, who are admittedly pretty anonymous. The film spends a lot of time detailing the sibling interplay between Sally and Franklin and the struggles of being in a wheelchair and whether the rest of the gang are frustrated that they have to account for him and if Sally even wanted him on this trip, but it literally never amounts to anything since Franklin is just suddenly slaughtered and Sally's on her own thereafter. There's also a lengthy interplay between the villains during the climax that is famous, the delirious dinner set piece, but has little of consequence actually occur. But the film is so atmospheric and the rhythms are so strange that overall it works anyway. It all works anyway. TCM never tips its hand, never blinks, and never lets up. And its format is so simple that it became a blueprint for decades of horror cinema in its wake, to drastically lesser success. The film was very successful and was perpetually re-released throughout the 70s and early 80s, so it's surprising that it took 12 long years to finally come up with a sequel. A film that ended up with the same director, but a drastically different tone for a drastically different era. Join us as we'll talk about that film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, next time on Sequelology.